Okay, happy Thursday, everyone. Now, I don't know if you knew this, but someone decided that it was officially Cookie Cutter Week here in the U.S. So today's edition of Green Builder Media's Impact Series, Game Changers in Sustainability, is anything but cookie cutter. Because today we'll be spending some time discussing the sharing economy with Robin Chase, co-founder of Zipcar and Buzzcar. Now, before we get started, I have to tell you that today's webinar would not be possible without the support of our generous sponsors. And those sponsors are BASF. BASF is a leader in the construction industry. With more than 600 products, serving 75 construction product categories, BASF offers the broadest portfolio of products used directly on construction sites or integrated into other products to improve the performance of construction projects. BASF is also a global leader in sustainability and corporate social responsibility, committed to constant improvements in safety, protection of health, and environmental conservation. Bio-based insulation. Bio-based insulation spray polyurethane products help to lessen the environmental impact of residential and commercial structures by sealing and insulating in one step. Bio-based insulation integrates rapidly renewable ingredients as replacement for a portion of the petroleum in many of their insulation products without hindering performance, and they replace chemical blowing agents with water. DuPont. DuPont puts science to work by creating sustainable solutions essential to a better, safer, healthier life for people everywhere. DuPont is focused on dynamic science that generates real-world solutions. That's why DuPont is at the forefront of building science with brands you depend on, like Tyvek, Century Glass, Corian Solid Surfaces, Zodiac Quartz Surfaces, and Kevlar. The Green Builder Coalition. The Green Builder Coalition amplifies the voice of green builders and professionals to drive advocacy and education for more sustainable building practices. For more information, log on to greenbuildercoalition.org. Uponor. Uponor is a worldwide supplier of radiant heating and cooling, plumbing, and fire sprinkler systems that provide energy and water efficiency to homes and businesses around the globe. To learn more, please visit uponor-usa.com. I'm Mike Collignan, Executive Director of the Green Builder Coalition, and I'm sitting in for Ron Jones today, so I'll be your host and your moderator for today's webinar. Now, I hope that during the course of today's presentation, you'll submit questions for our guest, Robin Chase. To do so, simply use the small box at the bottom of the Q&A. I'll review those questions and pose them to Robin during the Q&A time set aside near the end of the webcast. And now to introduce today's speaker. Robin Chase is founder and CEO of Buzzcar, a service that brings together car owners and drivers in a car-sharing marketplace. Buzzcar.com empowers individuals to take control of their mobility without looking to governments or big businesses for solutions. Robin is also founder and former CEO of Zipcar, the largest car-sharing company in the world, and Go Loco, an online ride-sharing community. She's currently on the board of the World Resources Institute, the National Advisory Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship for the U.S. Department of Commerce, and the OECD's International Transport Forum Advisory Board. Robin has been frequently featured in the major media and has received many awards in the areas of innovation, design, and environment, including Time's 100 Most Influential People, Fast Company's Fast 50 Innovators, and Business Week Top 10 Designers. Robin graduated from Wellesley College and MIT Sloan School of Management and was a Harvard University Loeb Fellow. Robin, welcome to the Impact Stage.
Hi, nice to be here.
Great to have you. Robin, you and I got to spend some time talking before this call, and you really have some interesting thoughts on organizational structures as they pertain to the sharing economy or the collaborative economy. Can you share some of those thoughts with us today?
It'll be my delight, and so that's why I thought I would just start this with a brief outline of what's going on, and that'll be a nice background for us. So I want to start with a curious part of the collaborative and sharing economy. So I'd like to talk about bed sharing. And so I'm hoping right now in your mind you are thinking about what bed sharing is all about. And when I think about bed sharing, I actually think more about when I do a lot of traveling and I'm going to friends' houses and staying with them. and I might be quite unlucky and have to stay in a teenager's room. Um, I'm just having a little bit of trouble with these slides. Let's use what this next slide is like.
Oh, that's okay. We'll,
Okay. So we think about when we go to people's houses for Thanksgiving or Christmas or on business trips, we're staying in their spare bedrooms. And if we're lucky, we'll have like a nice clean spare bedroom. And if we're really lucky, we'll have a double bed in their spare bedroom. And I joke that if we're not lucky at all, we'll end up with this teenager's room that I have a picture of, and I'll have to be squeezed into the corner there. And as I've been thinking about this, it's why we actually invented hotels. And hotels are, in fact, bed sharing. And when I had started Zipcar, everyone, my staff wanted to call Zipcar car sharing. And at the time, and perhaps even for some of you on the call today, car sharing really didn't have a meaning. No one except for transportation policy people knew what it meant. And I would say to my staff, imagine if we called hotels bed sharing, what would that feel like? It kind of gives a totally different idea to how you feel when you're sleeping in that bed. So on this theme of bed sharing, I decided I wanted to find out what were the largest bed sharing companies in the world. And I went and I looked online, and I found out that the Intercontinental Hotel Group was the largest in the world. And it's been around for about 60 years, and it has 645,000 rooms in 4,400 hotels in 100 countries. And as those of you on the call, I'm sure, can appreciate, think of the level of effort that went to build this largest hotel. And we can look and see that Hilton is 93 years old and hasn't achieved what the Intercontinental Hotel groups have been able to do. So all of that, figure out where you're going to put the hotel, planning it, financing it, building it, maintaining it, making wrong guesses, making right guesses, just the huge amount of effort to deliver this Intercontinental Hotel Group as the largest one. But of course, I'm cheating, and it's not the largest one. The largest one is Airbnb. And Airbnb, for those of you who don't know it, is 4 years old, and it's a website where I can put on my own, the spare bedroom in my own house or my second house or my apartment onto this website and make it available for people to come and stay at, just very much like a hotel. And Airbnb is only 4 years old, and in those 4 years, they've managed to gather 650,000 rooms in 192 countries, which is really phenomenal. And in fact, this is a kind of a point that I want to rest on, and I want everyone to be kind of in awe, which I personally am in awe when I look at this. And there's even one that's larger than this, which is, which I see I can't pull up on these slides, couch surfing. And couch surfing doesn't have money exchanging hands, but it's where individuals let strangers stay on their couches or their spare bedrooms. And they're 8 years old, and they have 1.5 million rooms available for people to stay at and rent. So if we look at this, we can see here Airbnb, after these 4 years, I keep having to switch this slide out because their growth is so phenomenal. In the last 6 months, they've gone from 5 million to 10 million nights have sold through Airbnb. It's just really an amazing thing that's happening. And so what do I think about this? I see it as kind of excess capacity. It's all those spare bedrooms or those unused houses or poorly used second homes that are being put on top of what I think of as a platform for participation. There's these websites, these companies that have created this platform that that can gather all of this stuff and put it together. What we see today is that more and more people see themselves as not just consumers, but also as producers, and that we as individuals more and more are engaging with the stuff that we buy and the stuff that we consume. We can think of all the ratings. I was watching my sister watch TV a couple weeks ago in Montreal. She's a couple years older than me, and I was so struck by the way that she watched TV versus the way it was watched in my house. In her house, she sits down, turns the TV on, and waits to see what happens, might change some channels. And in my house, people are online selectively choosing what they want to show. They're looking at YouTube, they're looking at friends' clips, they're going back and forth between different types of media, and they're really creating and consuming in a different and participatory way. So if we look at this, here's all these companies that you guys have heard about for the last 10 years, and we've all been talking about them because they've had such amazing growth and have really transformed our lives. And I want you to look at them differently. All of those companies are really excess capacity on platforms for participation. So Google knows what to put at the top of the search page because of my searches and my links. When I type in car sharing France, I choose Buzzcar, and so it knows that that's what that choice is made. And so Facebook is really interesting only because I put my friends and my photos on it. YouTube, it's all of our videos that are creating this, and Wikipedia, it's my expertise, eBay, my stuff, Flickr, my photos. So we see we have this amazing speed and scale of things that can happen. And I feel actually there's something more going on here, and I think of it as peers incorporated. And what do I mean by that? That if we look at the two, it's a partnership between individuals and companies where each brings the best of what it has to offer. So the incorporated side, the companies, they're bringing all the things that companies do really well, which is they can deliver economies of scale and bulk pricing, significant and long-term resource investment. So they'll make investments for year after year, whereas individuals can't quite do that. Expertise in many realms. Individuals are good at one or two things, whereas companies can hire groups where they're skilled in all sorts of things. And importantly, standards, rules, and recourse. If we think of Airbnb, it's not 650,000 bed and breakfasts. It's one company and it's a one brand promise and one contractual relationship. And all of this is put together on this platform for participation and bound together by the brand promise. And that's what the company brings. Individuals are providing all the things that are really expensive and difficult for companies to bring. Prime among them is diversity, that they can provide an incredibly diverse type of offering, and localization, customization, specialization, all these things that are really expensive for big companies to do, but are exactly what we as individuals want to do. Access to our social networks, we can think of the endless business, advice, which is trying to tap into social networks. When it's me and my friends, I tap into them naturally. And also the peers bring a huge amount of innovation to what's going on, and I'll talk about that just in a minute. So the peers are providing the service and the product, and the company is the platform for participation. What's really remarkable is the speed and scale that can happen with this new organizational structure. Carpooling.com is a ride-sharing company, so think of all the excess seats that surround you as you go on a trip. It's German. It's 10 years old. Every month it moves 1 million passengers, which is the same as 2,500 high-speed rail trains, which is kind of remarkable, and they didn't lay a track or buy a train. All excess capacity on a platform for participation. Its competitor, BlaBlaCar, is out of France, and here you can see what their growth has looked like over the last 7 years. They're in France and also in several other European countries. Buzzcar is the company that I founded, which is doing which is ride sharing. So individuals can, not ride sharing, car sharing, individuals can rent out their own car to their friends and neighbors. And what Buzzcar had to do was as I say, do all the stuff that's hard for individuals and companies can do. So it took me about a year to get insurance. This is in France. And I had to get insurance that protected the individual car owner and meant that the driver could drive without a huge deductible and safely. We built the website. We did all the reservations and technology, and we also provided a consistent contract between the owners and the drivers. And just as an example, you can see that after we're about 15 months old in France right now, and in those 15 months we now have 12,000 people who have signed up to drive and 1,700 owners who have said their cars are available to rent, and they are all across France. And for a traditional car sharing company, this would be really difficult and impossible to provide this level of service in this number of locations in that amount of time. So I think I'm just going to skip that, and I just want to leave you with this idea of peers incorporated. and what this sharing economy can deliver is that once you get the platform down, you can grow at an incredible speed and scale, leveraging these little pockets of excess capacity that are found all over. And we're also finding, just moving to a more general thing for this conversation we'll have today, is that what we saw with Zipcar famously, and now with Airbnb, is that people don't feel the need so much to own the asset. What they really want is the use of the asset. And so we really are moving from this ownership economy to a use economy. And lastly, just to talk about the benefits, is what we find is that there's some really important unintended benefits when you share rather than own. And so for Zipcar, I remarked that today Zipcar has 11,000 cars parked across North America and in a couple countries in Europe. And what it means is that instead of me, Robin Chase, owning my one car that's going to be parked downstairs, I have access to this fleet across the world. I can choose the right car that fits each individual trip I'm taking. Do I need a pickup truck? Do I need a van? Do I need a small car? Do I need a big car? And I personally don't ever have to do the maintenance for it. So in many, many respects, car sharing is much, much better than car ownership. But it took us a while to understand that and appreciate that. And of course, I only pay as I use. So that's really what I wanted to start out to give you guys things to think about. And now let's have a conversation.
Well, I appreciate that. And you know, car sharing is a concept that goes back to the late 40s. But you were really a pioneer of ride sharing in the U.S. when you founded Zipcar. And like you said, you've since founded Buzzcar. But can you walk us through how simple the process is?
Yep. And I do think it's the magic of well-applied technology that really was transforming. So Zipcar's technology made renting and using a rental car as easy and convenient as using your own car. And what does that mean? It means that right now you can make a reservation when you're a member, either online or by telephone. It takes about 30 seconds, and you make a reservation for a specific car that's in your neighborhood for a specific time. And these cars are parked throughout the dense metropolitan areas. So you walk to the car, and people say to me with shock, "You walk to the car?" Yeah, you walk to the car because there are millions and millions of people, hundreds, I want to say probably 50 million people that are within a 5-minute walk of a Zipcar. So it's parked right in your neighborhood, very, very close by. You go to the car and you unlock it by holding your card over a spot on the windshield, or you can also unlock it with a smartphone app. And the right car will only open to the right person at the right time. So it unlocks the door and enables the ignition and opens the billing record. So then you drive round trip and you park back in that same reserved parking spot. And when you get out, you lock the door, and your reservation, your reservation is done, and your billing record has been made. You're invoiced. So it really is. What's critical is that there's no one between you and the car. You do it whenever you want, 24/7. As I say, they're parked everywhere. You only pay for what you use. And I'm sitting right now in New York City, and the Zipcars are dramatically closer and easier, or as easy as anyone is able to park their own car in the city.
You know, I would think some people might be nervous about letting a stranger use their car or riding with a car full of strangers. There seems to be a certain level of trust that's needed here. And I would think maybe feedback or a rating would play a vital role. Is that how this type of system addresses any kind of personal safety concerns?
So with Zipcar, we started this. I founded it 12 years ago, and ratings and commentaries hadn't even been invented yet. What we did then, and what Zipcar does today, is they do a background driving check. So I can know that you as a driver haven't had any car accidents in the last 3 years and have a good record. And that's what Buzzcar does today from the side of the driver. I know that they have a good driving record. As to the car, for Zipcar, all the cars are new, and we maintain them. The company maintains them. For Buzzcar, we have ratings and commentaries around both the individual drivers and the owners. And so after each trip, owners rate drivers and drivers rate owners and leave a commentary. So, would you rent this car again? Yes or no? Would you rent to this person again? Yes or no? And what a comment in the commentary. So it's a mechanism. I want to say that I think it was eBay that discovered this as a requirement, that when you deal with peers, with individuals, there's a lot of junk and there's a lot of stuff that's great, and we have to really get the junk right off the table very fast, which is, and if you think about YouTube, it's the same thing, that you can, ratings commentaries let you sort very quickly.
We've got a question from AJ asking about the car sharing topics. So I want to stay on that for a moment, if it's okay. The question is, can you see car sharing and automated cars, like what Google's working on, supplanting the need for additional mass transit infrastructure spending?
I feel like AJ must have just been listening to a conversation I was having yesterday on this topic. I see them as complementary. If we think about the automated cars, and I think both electric vehicles and a self-drive car is best suited in a shared environment because it's an expensive asset. And so we really want to make best use of that. And the self-driving, the automated cars will be expensive, and yes, they will replace many taxis in cities. But if we think about the space that car still takes up in dense urban areas, it's only solving one small piece of the transportation problem, that a bus going down the street, or in particular subway cars, they transport vastly larger sums of people in very, very small amounts of space than people driving around in automated cars will ever do. So right today, Robin surrounded by her car is me surrounded by 120 square feet just to carry my own body around. And if we think of dense cities, we have the issues of parking as well as the amount of space on streets. So for me, these self-drive cars will become one piece of a much larger complementary solution. But one person, one car, there's just not enough space on any of the streets to continue to have one person, one car. And I also have a little bit of fear about the self-drive car, is that today, from a transportation standpoint, when you think of, just think of, there's this great slide that someone did on a slideshow. So picture the slide with the 1,000 cars, 8 lanes of traffic, and all completely jammed to a standstill. The self-drive car is not helping that situation one bit. So now the drivers, the one person in each one of those cars is looking at their laptop and reading their email. But that has not solved that congestion at all. And part of the problem with that congestion is that it's one person in each one of those cars. And we in the transportation industry hate single occupancy vehicles because they take up so much space. And so I have been reminding my colleagues that if we hated single occupancy vehicles, we're really going to hate zero occupancy vehicles, which is what the automated cars can deliver as they go to pick someone up. So it has a place, but it's definitely not the end all, because it's not clear to me what problem it's solving. Maybe safety issues, which will be quite far out. But it's not solving lots of the other problems that have to do with transportation.
And transportation has different forms. I remember seeing a profile of a man who was running a bike sharing program up in the Pacific Northwest. I think it was Portland. And he would collect donated bikes. He'd paint them yellow so they stood out, and he parked them all around town for just anyone to use, free of charge. But the maintenance of all those bikes, it really became overwhelming for him. And I don't believe that program operates anymore, at least not in the original capacity. Are there other types of transportation sharing programs out there? I mean, obviously cars, bicycles. I don't know if there are.
Right, there's all kinds. Yeah. So if we think, one of the things that I learned as I was building Zipcar is that the capitalist model works fabulously well in that we were able to build a company that was financially sustainable and ultimately profitable. And when we have something that's completely free, there's a couple things that happen. One, when it's completely free, people don't value it. They think it's not worth a lot, so they don't take good care of it. And it's really hard to maintain and sustain and grow a business model like that. It's not a business model, right? So what we do see is bike sharing is actually exploding in cities around the world, and they have varying ways of paying for that bike sharing. And in those bike sharing programs, there is an operator who is maintaining those bicycles. I just lived the last 2 years in Paris, where they have one of the largest ones in the world, 20,000 bikes parked at 1,500 stations. And I have to say, it is transforming to live in a city with that as access. And for me, actually, it was, if I had to think of taking a bike versus an automated car, for the vast bulk of my trips, I'd still be taking the bike. It's incredibly fast and incredibly light, and you can go 2 blocks because you have a blister and just park it at another stop. Or, it started to rain, you can hop off the bike and jump in the subway. It's a really great system, but the business models are still definitely being worked out. Another colleague of mine in San Francisco just launched an electric scooter sharing program called Scoot, Scoot, and they just launched just a few months ago. I think in Taiwan, there's also a scooter sharing program. And in fact, there's jet sharing. And I think someone else was pointing me to a boat sharing program. So I think we're seeing a lot of transportation sharing these days. It's an expensive asset that we're using, that we typically, our own car, which is probably among all the things that we use the most, we use about an hour and a half per day on average across the year. So it's sitting idle parked all the rest of that time.
Well, and that applies to people who commute. If you work from home, then you're probably using your vehicle even less.
That's actually the target market for car sharing. It's people who don't need a car to get to work. If you need a car to get to work, you're going to be spending that $9,000 a year on average in America to do that. And when I look at that, that means the first hour and a half per day of the average American's salary is going towards paying off just getting to work and back. And as we know, if you're not using a car to get to work, you've got that sitting in your driveway now, and there's more options of ways to get around it.
Right. So it almost, to me at least, as the car sharing concept, it seems to go hand in hand with the remote or virtual workplace. Where you're not normally commuting, your car's sitting even more. It makes even more sense then.
Does it go hand in hand with that? We're finding it very successful in dense metropolitan areas where people are taking bike or transit to work, and in university towns, again, where people are making very short commutes. If the work from home, I think, is a small subset, because if you work from home and you live in the middle of a small town in Montana or, some rural place, you're still going to need a car to go get food. But it could replace the second car, in that in those neighborhoods you could say, which is where I'd say Buzzcar also comes into play, peer-to-peer car sharing, is that for neighbors' second cars or their specialty cars, those are really easily shared, and people would still own one car to get around, and when they needed that second car a couple hours a week, they could be sharing one of their neighbors and feel protected by the insurance and be remunerating their neighbor so that there's no favor owed.
I find this very fascinating because a lot of times you hear the analogy used of, if we do this and we save this amount of energy or whatever, it's like taking so many cars off the road. And this concept literally is taking cars off the road. I mean, you're just it's encouraging people to buy fewer cars and share them. So
The numbers are really phenomenal, and now I have to say them quite carefully, that for Zipcar, so a traditional car sharing company, and traditional, by that I mean the company owns and maintains its car, and they're well used. These shared cars are running 30 to 50% of the time. Each one of those cars replaces 15 to 20 cars because each car is used by 40 to 60 people on average, and 40% of those people decide that they don't have to buy a car or can sell their car because of the company. So it is definitely, for each one of those cars, they've taken 15 to 20 cars off the street. But more importantly, the people who are driving the cars tend to drive about 80% less, fewer miles, because now I joke that, Robin wants some ice cream, and when I have my own car and I want some ice cream, I jump in the car and I go buy some ice cream. When I'm doing shared car and I say, I want some ice cream, I'm thinking, wow, do I really want to spend $8 an hour and go reserve the car to go buy the ice cream? The answer is no. I would, I'll buy ice cream on my way home from work tomorrow, and I'll eat those old cookies in the kitchen cabinet. So that people use, when they do car sharing, they use the car when it's the right mode for that need. That because now I'm spending in real time, all the costs of car ownership are now packed right into my use case. I make much more rational decisions about it. And when we have our own car, we never think about insurance, depreciation, parking, and if pressed, we'll think about gas. But all the other costs, we just don't even think about.
You bring up gas, and James is wanting to know if rising fuel prices will affect this industry.
Rising fuel prices will affect this industry, and I would say positively, because rising fuel prices will make people think about their dependence on their cars, as I noted, and that when you move from your car ownership to car sharing, you tend to drive about 80% less. So I think it will be a positive impact. As to its bottom line and its profitability, Zipcar can and has and should change its prices to reflect those gas prices. Right now, people drive about, this is kind of a shocking thing, people drive about 7 miles an hour, as in that's how much distance they travel in a car when you're using it. And so the effect of gas prices on the whole total costs today is, maybe 10% of the cost of driving a car in the U.S. is the cost of gas. In Europe, it's closer to 25 or 30% because of the taxes that have been included. But it's still not the whole cost, and prices, of course, can and should be adjusted to reflect that.
Just, I want to clarify, you said people drive 7 miles in an hour?
Yep.
Okay, that's
yep.
7 miles an hour.
No, they cover several miles of distance in an hour.
Okay.
Because they drive, they park, they do whatever they're doing, they come back. It's really kind of fascinating that it holds true. It holds true in whether you took a 1-hour trip, a 3-hour trip, a 5-hour trip, or a 24-hour trip. It kind of boils down to about 7 or 8 miles an hour.
Okay. AJ wants to know if you see CNG as a car fuel growing in use.
Oh, I'd love to say this. I don't know. I stuck my area of expertise. I've been trying to confine to behavior and how we use transportation. And I can't speak for what is the better engine, the better motor. I haven't been tracking that. I will say there was this. I was in India, and they have these 3-wheeled cars called tuk-tuks. So a little 3-wheeled, like a 3-wheeled scooter with a hat on it, kind of.
Right.
And they're everywhere. They're quite ubiquitous, these auto rickshaws. And in Bangalore, the city is pitch black, filthy, disgusting. You can cut the smoke with a knife. It's just so repulsive. In Delhi, there was a rule, I think it's about 5 or 6 years ago, where a person took a lawsuit against the city and said the city's charter said that part of the city's charter was to make people was happiness, and this person said that this amount of smoke was taking away his happiness potential, and the courts ruled for him. So 6 years ago, all the auto rickshaws in Delhi had to become CNG, and so when you go to Delhi, it is a clean air in streets, and it is so incredible to fly from one city to the other. The same number of auto rickshaws on the street, which is as many yellow cabs as there are in New York, just thousands and thousands of them, and the quality of air was just dramatic. So I vote for CNG in terms of over two-stroke engines anytime.
And just for those who aren't aware, CNG stands for?
Certified natural gas?
Okay. I figured.
Maybe not certified. Something else. AJ, you can tell us. Something else natural gas.
Compressed.
Compressed, thank you. Compressed.
James and AJ are on the ball there. We've talked a lot about transportation, and certainly people in the audience have questions about that. They can continue to send those in. But I wanted to see what you thought about how the sharing economy might affect both the new construction and the remodeling processes, because obviously, Green Builder Media, we get, there's a lot of interest in building and construction, usually in our audience. So how do you see that sharing economy affecting that sector?
I think it's having actually I think it will have an increasingly large impact. There's a lot of talk in many startups doing co-office workspace and co-housing and also hoteling, which in office space, which is if we think of the same parallel with how much I use my car, for many companies, that's how much their employees are actually using their office space. So people who have people on the road, I want to say the accounting companies or any service industry, in consulting firms, instead of each person having their own assigned desk, they are now having their stuff in a cubby or a little mini locker that they bring with them to the open space, and then they choose a desk. When they come in, they choose a desk or an office. And I know a lot of companies are moving to that as a means of cutting down on how much square footage they have to have per person. Hoteling. And there's a whole bunch of people who are freelancing who are using shared space. I've been thinking also a lot about life cycles and infrastructure. And the more flexible we build things, the more it can be adapted and its excess capacity can be shared out. So making things that are more basic. You and I had talked beforehand. One of my pet lost excess capacity peeves are things like all the fabulous auditoriums that got built into middle schools and high schools across the country, built with my public dollars.
Right.
And they have huge auditoriums and huge swimming pools and just even basic rooms that are going idle large most of the time. And wouldn't it be great if the local theater could use it, or if people for events could be using those? And whenever it's brought up, the question is, oh, well, the safety and security, and we have to have somebody on call there, and we don't want you walking through the entire school to get to it. And I think, well, why didn't we make a door so it could be used by other people? Another example we had talked about before, I'm remembering now, is parking. In Paris, where I've just been living, the vacancy rate is, I think, 70% of the parking is vacant in Paris, which seems so stunning. And why is that? Because Paris has its beautiful buildings that didn't come with parking to begin with. And in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, all the new construction was mandated to have parking spaces built in underneath those new buildings. And they built them so they only have access to owners. And the people who live in those buildings are uninterested in owning cars at anything like the rates they were required to build parking for, because they live in these dense cities and they don't use cars. I think only 50% of the households in Paris have cars. So there's all this parking that's now vacant that no one can get at because it's got entryways that require card access are very, very narrow, and they plunk people into the middle of closed spaces that aren't accessible to the public. So when we build these parking in particular, and I think parking will be increasingly disappearing, so we should be building parking that can be accessible to others, number one, and number two, that can be turned into something else in some future life, number two.
And that is it's going to take a significant shift there. And the reason that I feel that way is because you have to have the building owners that want to do that, the trades who want to who buy into that, but also I think about the code, and I think about how in a commercial setting, and it may not be necessarily the specific code, but it may be a certain city ordinance that says if you put in a retail business, you have to have X number of parking spaces.
Right, and that's exactly, you are completely correct, and city by city is changing those codes to say things like, we're going to let the market decide, and so we're going to have no parking, they're talking about parking, no parking minimums, so you can go as low as you want to go. And I do see it as a transitional battle because I was just, a friend of mine is the director of planning in Washington, D.C., and she was ruing that, parking garages have been built under old rules, and she would tell the developer, no, I really want you to build less, and he was unwilling, and there are these parking garages that have more than half the floors are empty, and what can they do with them? I also know that neighbors are another real problem, that neighbors are, and I want to say that 30 years ago, I was among those complaining neighbors, that I would say, yeah, you're building this big building, and I know it's going to have people who live there who are going to be parking on street, and that's going to be taking away my free, easy parking on street. But what we know is that when you put parking in buildings, people are encouraged to own them, to fill them, and if they aren't, then it's just real waste. So I'm saying things on all sides, but we're absolutely in a transition where in the major cities, they're reducing the demand and requirements for parking, and in my view, they're reducing them not fast enough, which is why I would love to let the developer decide, because the developer should have his eye on what the market wants. And I kind of have this fantasy, and I admit that it's a fantasy, that wouldn't it be great if we could have building codes and zoning codes that are pegged to evolve over time? That when we go from a town that has 20 humans per square mile to one that has 50, 100, 20,000, 40,000, that the rules change as density increases. And can we write laws that recognize the changing face of a neighborhood so that we stop building things that people in those neighborhoods no longer want?
Well, there is good news on that front as far as, the codes themselves go, and that is that the codes are typically updated on a national level every 3 years, and then, but the jurisdiction, so that could be, a major metropolitan city, it could be a small area in a rural setting, not just one town, but many towns. They're able to make modifications specific for their locality. The thing it can't change that very easily as we build now is the structure itself, and that's where I think where you're talking about, where you're saying, well, let's make some more flexible buildings. To me, it really hit home when you were talking about the auditoriums and the theaters, and you were saying how, look, some of these things sit empty for a while. The revenue potential, if you were to be the person in the community who built the theater, the revenue potential there to rent it out to others. Can you talk a little bit about the revenue potential? Because in videos that I've watched of you give to TED and to BIF, you talk a little bit about some of those revenue potentials for this type of economy. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Well, so I have been thinking a lot about this idea of excess capacity, and I urge everybody to think about the buildings that they build, where is there excess capacity, and how can you make that open? How can you make it shareable, and how can you make that something that's open to people? If we go back to my Zipcar example, it's because people so underuse their cars that we basically bought our own cars and said, share ours. We made all those idle hours open. If we thought of buildings, and I do feel like the number of rooms that are idle, can we build it so that people have access? And what I've found is that when you build these platforms for participation, ways for people to have access, it is another revenue stream for you, because people, instead of me buying a whole building or instead of me buying a whole office space, if I could rent rooms just when I like them more flexibly, it feels, people are thinking that it feels more nerve-wracking because they're taking, I'm saying people as in the owners, which would you rather have, someone signs a lease for 5 years or someone who's renting rooms by the day? I understand that we think we want to rent the rooms for 5 years, but I think that in many, many cases that ends up not happening, and so we have all these idle space. And so if we could build it to begin with the possibility of opening it up, and then opening, and then being able to open it up and rent in smaller bites. Just back to the car example, which I know and I think is good parallels for you. If we think about Zipcar, before us, you could rent car rental, and it's a 24-hour minimum bundle. And the car rental industry clearly had no desire or interest to break their 24-hour minimum bundle to hourly, which is what Zipcar does. And in lots of places, they don't need to. But in these dense urban areas, they were cutting out a whole large market that wanted access to cars for less than a 24-hour minimum, and that changed how they relate to cars. And the price that Zipcar charges for an hour is not 1/24th of a daily rate. It's more like 1/8 of a daily rate. And so, yeah, we have to get 8 one-hour rentals now to equal a daily rate, but it turns out that there's a whole bunch of people who want to do that. So too, when we think about these spaces, I'm not suggesting that you're going to be selling the square footage at the same rate or price as you would rent a much larger space, but people want to have smaller bites for smaller periods of time, and we should make that accessible to them.
Well, Robin, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this, because it's a huge concept. It's a fascinating concept, and it's one that is in motion.
It is in motion, and it is. And again, I would really urge people to think about excess capacity and think about it from a time perspective, from a physical perspective, and not just hard assets. Their staff, their systems, their know-how, and how can they get more out of that asset? How can they get a bigger return on investment by tapping into that excess capacity?
If you will, we got one more question from AJ, and he's been a good guy, so we'll let him in. What is your thought on, and this is another big topic here, pay-as-you-go pricing for roadways?
AJ, yes, AJ, I can see that AJ is definitely a transportation buff. Pay-as-you-go pricing for roads. For those who don't know, today we pay for our road infrastructure by gas taxes, and those gas taxes were set in 1991, and they haven't been raised since then. And if you could think about the price of construction, how it is raised in those last 21 years, you can imagine that our taxes are totally inadequate for the cost of infrastructure. And having spent time in Europe, I can tell you that the U.S. infrastructure is crumbling. So that's A, we have an inadequate tax base. And then B, if we move to electric vehicles, or just say more fuel-efficient vehicles, when you used to buy, 20 gallons of gas a week to do your job, now you've got a more fuel-efficient car, and now you're using 10 gallons a week to get your to do it. Yet I'm still stuck with the same with a price per gallon. It's a totally untenable, it's from a tax perspective, it's not paying for our roads and highways. We have to move off of that system. So the idea of moving from pay tax by the gallon to tax by the mile is one that has been, I want to say, it's going to happen. And the question is, how do we get there, and when are we going to get there? So I'm a strong proponent in moving to road pricing. It's called road pricing because I really would like to have safer, better, newer infrastructure. I think it's important for our economy and it's important for us. So how we get there is going to be tricky. So one of the things that I've been around this issue of excess capacity, one of the topics I've been talking about is if we think of transponders that people have bought in their cars, bought to pay for tolls and go through tolls quickly, those transponders are, the wireless aspect of those transponders is probably put to use 15 seconds a month, tops. Like what are the number of seconds as you drive through that toll booth? And yet we have this $30 to $60 transponder in our car that's so underused. And my second point is, why do we have to have one kind of transponder? We've been doing electronic payments, which were invented here in New York, again in '91, to pay for the bridge and tunnels. But today we pay electronically in many forms for all sorts of things. So from an excess capacity standard, something I'm incredibly interested in is having a box, a transponder-like box in every car that individuals would buy themselves. If you think of your iPhone and apps, imagine if you had a car box and apps that you could put on it. And you personally would buy that box. And among the things among the apps would be paying for tolls, paying for parking, paying for road pricing. But there would be many other more pleasant apps like navigation systems, locking my 16-year-old out of the car at midnight because they didn't get home on curfew, or having my elderly parent not be able to turn the car on when it's dark, or, I don't know, finding out how great my driving is. And that this one box could be doing any number of applications that I as an individual would put on there, and among the apps would be ways to pay for things associated with my car, like road pricing.
Well, I really appreciate you going into that, and I'll give Robin a small plug here. There's a link up there to a YouTube talk that she gave, and then there's also one not up there, but I found one on YouTube, a TED talk that she gave. We didn't even get into the whole topic of mesh networks today, but Robin's got thoughts on that as well. I encourage you to take a look at those videos. Robin, I really appreciate the time today, and I think the audience really connected with this, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I wanted to also take one more opportunity to thank our sponsors, which were BASF, Bio-Based Insulation, DuPont, Green Builder Coalition, and Uponor. And again, thank our wonderful audience. Thank you, Robin, for taking the time today. We hope you all join us next year for more of the Impact Series, Game Changers in Sustainability. This will be the last one for this year. And I wish you all a safe